As the 1980s drew to a close, Doctor Who was on its last legs. The BBC had been giving it chance after chance, and in their eyes it was failing quite miserably. In their eyes it was becoming a stale show and a pale imitation of what it used to be. Decision came down from the BBC head office to recast the Doctor. Against John Nathan Turner's best efforts, they weren't even able to give Colin Baker a regeneration story, and thus the Seventh Doctor was born, played by Sylvester McCoy. And although this era started off slow, it became infamous for its better concepts than previous years, and seems to be heading in a genuinely good direction. Some of the stories that they had in this time were really progressive and showed a good future for the show going into the 1990s. And then it got cancelled. For the second time in 5 years, Doctor Who was put out by the BBC, this time not returning until 2005. But during such a pivotal and interesting era, there must have been stories that made it through the cracks, right? You'd be right. Today I'm going to be looking at the best 7th Doctor stories you will never see. Hopefully we uncover some gems today. Now this video will focus on the missing season 27. This is the season that would have been made had Doctor Who not been cancelled after Survival. Despite there not being any concrete plans for the series actually happening, 7 stories were proposed to the production team while season 26 was being made. Some of these have gone on to become audio dramas, and some of these have gone on to become books. So the first one that we have here is called Earth Aid. It was a 3-part story that was going to be made by Ben Aronovich, who you will have heard of because he wrote Remembrance of the Daleks. This story was described as a space opera with an insect-like Japanese samurai-based characteristics called the Metatraxy, and they were going to be villains of the piece, whilst the moral of the story is going to be on human aid, on how people help one another, with a lot of the themes in it paralleling World War. Now, the second story may sound a little bit familiar to you, as it is entitled Thin Ice. This was, of course, a modern Who episode in Series 10, was it? Yeah, in Series 10. This story would have been quite different, though, as it would have taken place in London and would have transported between London and Mars, with the Isoias trying to take it over, I believe. This story would have also seen the departure of Ace, as she would go off to the Academy to become a Time Lord. Being written by Mark Platt, this story is currently available as a Big Finish audio adventure if you ever wish to find out exactly what this was about. Now, something I didn't say about Thin Ice is it would have set up who the next companion would have been. An unnamed character who was essentially going to become the new Brigadier, who had connections to the underworld of the UK, I guess, was able to help save the day in that story, and at the very end it is revealed that she has a daughter. In the subsequent story, to be written by Andrew Cartmel, Crime of the Century would have seen the introduction of that daughter become the new companion, and she would have been quite interesting because she was a safecracker, a burglar, you know, and I wonder how that would have worked with the Doctor's ideals. Unfortunately, I can't find too much about this story, but it has been adapted as a Big Finish adventure, so if you want to go and give it a listen, I would highly recommend it. The next story would also have been penned by Andrew Cartmel, and would have been called Animal. Not a lot is known about this story, weirdly enough, but it is apparently a Big Finish audio adventure as well, known as Blood and Iron. The next story we know quite a bit about. It is called Night Thoughts. Written by Edward Young, this horror story would have been set entirely within an isolated house. I'm going to imagine a very small house. And it would feature a group of university staff. And these characters would all be trapped within this house, and one of them would be revealed to be a murderer. This one actually sounds really interesting, and I might pick it up because it is, of course, adapted as a Big Finish audio drama. Now it's funny that I mentioned World War One because we're actually going to have a story set there now, with A School for Glory. This does not have a lot of information about it other than it was going to be set during World War One and planned to use the setting of both the trenches and a British country house during the time, which would have doubled as an army academy, so I imagine we would have seen the moral side of training recruits for war. But this story was written by Tony Achells, and this would have been the final story of the season. What's interesting to note here is, despite Sylvester McCoy saying this would have been his last season, there is no regeneration story in sight. So I do wonder what that would have been like. The closest I could find about when the Doctor was meant to leave was at the beginning of the next season after that, in a story called Lixion. Now, not a lot is known about that story, but it is said that actor Richard Griffiths was rumoured to play the Doctor after him. Now, I have to say this sounds like it would have been a very strong season, especially the episode Thin Ice. The Ice Warriors would have made a much needed return, and it would have really elevated that season. The saddest part, of course, would have been losing Ace, but I think that would have been a good amount of time on the series for, 3-4 years that would have been? And the new companion sounds really interesting. It sounds like Andrew Cartmel and the production team at the time had realised that writing proper characters as companions was the way forward, and making them a vital part of the story, which is something we obviously got in New Who, so I imagine this was the natural progression of the series at the time. All in all, this strange time in Doctor Who's history will be one of the biggest what-if situations in history, and is perfect for this kind of video. So yeah guys, I'm going to leave it there, and I hope that you've enjoyed, and I hope you've learned something new about the classic series. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like, give me a subscribe, and stick around for the next video where I look at the best stories of the 8th Doctor's era that you will never see.